I'm pretty pessimistic about it. And so the Reveal report that Lumen published a couple weeks ago talked about a couple of North Korean people that we spoke with who have since escaped, um, jailbreaking their North Korean devices, their North Korean smartphones. But they weren't able to get access to the internet with that. They were able to change some of the configurations on their phone. They tried to get access to satellite internet, which they weren't able to. Um, so the main message that we pulled from that was that people were taking a lot of risks to try to access the internet on their phones. I don't think this is going to be any scalable measure for the greater population to try to access greater information with their North Korean smartphones for a couple of reasons. One is the North Korean smartphones, especially the more recent ones since 2000, the late 2000, 16, 17 and onward, those phones have a lot of software that automatically updates without the user's permission. It just automatically updates. And so a lot of the software on these North Korean smartphones have measures that have surveillance and censorship measures. And so, for example, couple if there's a foreign file that's trying to be played on a North Korean smartphone, it may automatically delete that file because it recognizes that it's a foreign file. So these surveillance and censorship technologies are becoming only more sophisticated inside North Korea. And secondly, from a legal perspective, the North Korean government passed a law December 2020, the anti-revolutionary and cultural law. And it basically discusses how more types of information consumption and then behaviors that signal consumption of information will be punished, but also furthermore, any tampering with North Korean devices, any tampering with North Korean cell phones will be punished as well. So it signals, so that law, that particular inclusion that the government is very aware of citizens trying to mess with their phones, signals that the government's going to only put more resources into trying to curtail these activities. The government is circulating a lot of information very quickly inside North Korea about COVID, how to prevent it, how to treat it, and what to do to try to avoid getting COVID. There's a lot of not true information that's being circulated. So and a lot of it does have to do with lack of resources inside the country. It also released a flyer that I saw a couple days ago of how not to get COVID, which is, it's an infographic flyer. It talks about how not to touch balloons with leaflets in it. So that's one way to avoid getting COVID. Another PSA, public service announcement that the North Korean government put out was for people to avoid touching wildlife, anything coming in from the ocean, especially water bottles, because some South Korean activists throw water bottles with rice and USBs in the hopes that they get to North Korea. This PSA say to avoid touching those because that's another way to get COVID. But there can be ways that, like, for example, your organization, Radio Free Asia, also Voice of America, other radio programs that have consistent programming into North Korea can share true information about what people can do, what kind of precautions people can take to try to avoid getting COVID, now, especially when North Korean government is sharing a lot of information that's either not helpful to its citizens or actually actively harmful to its citizens. Biden's visit to Asia, which obviously is the timing is such that it will be very provocative, and it'll bring attention back to North Korea. One is, like you said, it will probably slow down any ongoing negotiations among humanitarian aid organizations and countries to provide aid. We do know that they have been accepting aid quite openly from Beijing in the past a week or two. But if there's going to be another test, I think other than with China, any ongoing negotiations will be stalled. I think it can have two potential effects domestically among its population. One is it can either signal to its part of its domestic population that their nation is very strong, that they're able to launch a weapons test in spite of a domestic pandemic. The other reaction, which we will never know about because no one's going to actually voice it publicly, disappointment, for lack of better words, that in light of a pandemic inside North Korea, where the numbers of cases went from 0 to 2.2 million within a week, according to the state media, so we could probably guess that the numbers are much higher, that they're allocating all those resources to weapons. And if this doesn't come under control, not only will it be a devastation for its people, but it's going to be devastating to Kim Jong-un's legitimacy. In terms of the anti-leak or the information gag law or the anti-leaflet law that was passed by President Moon's administration a year and a half ago, I would strongly recommend that President Yoon either repeal it or if he is unable to get a parliamentary majority to do that, then at the very least not enforce the law. Ideal way forward in terms of the respect to the anti-leaflet law would be to repeal it. And that's because it'll not only decriminalize the act of sending and disseminating information from South Korea to the North, but it'll also give a positive signal to the human rights activists inside and outside of South Korea, as well as South Koreans' allies, the US and European allies and so forth, that this president is valuing democratic values and liberal values over prioritizing short-term mitigations of low-level threats coming from the North. I strongly do believe that President Yoon and his administration, as well as Biden's administration, have very strong values when it comes to the protection of basic universal human rights. And I do believe that those shared values are going to materialize in much more robust joint positions on North Korea's human rights ongoing abuses against its people.